Now we're doing it. Welcome to Art 116 afternoon class. And I wanted to continue my discussion demonstration of this Tetrad project that we started last week, or that at least I introduced us to on last Friday. And I'm really encouraging people to get involved with this. And it may take a little bit of time for folks to warm up and get involved with it. But here we go. Um, Let me change my view to the overhead camera view. And I'm going to put these out of the way just a minute while we kind of rehash this for just a second. So I'm asking you guys to use a square superimposed over the color wheel to choose the four colors at the four corners of the square. And that would be your standard or orthodox tetrad. And so the way that this is sitting right here, orange, yellow, green would be my two kind of warm colors and high key colors. Red, violet, and blue would be my two lower key colors. I guess red, violet would be a little on the warm side. Blue would be on the cool side. I guess yellow, green is thought of more as a cool color rather than a warm color. See how this goes? I mean, it's a spectrum and you never know. So anyway, the other way of creating a tetrad is the double split complement. And that is, of course, to have a complement color pair and then split off from both ends to choose those four colors for your double split complement. So if we were using yellow and violet, then yellow, orange, yellow, green, red, violet, and blue, violet would be my double split complement colors for this. I want you guys to use one of these methods for choosing a color tetrad, to choose that color tetrad, and then to write it down. I actually, on my project, I have written down yellow, orange, red, orange, blue, green, and blue, violet as my four colors that I've chosen, because that is the color tetrad that I have chosen using the double split complement method. My complements were orange and blue, and so red, orange, yellow, orange, blue, green, and blue, violet are going to be my four colors that I'm building my painting out of. So you are tasked with using this method to choose your tetrad that you're going to work with for this project. Then I'm asking you guys to come over here to Eden Hall and pick yourself up at least one of these, maybe two. This is printed out on cardstock, and this is the computerized, photoshopped version of Cezanne's Still Life with Apples. And so I'm talking about doing a painting where we are reinterpreting or painting an homage to Cezanne's Still Life with Apples. And so it's a relatively easy still life to work with. I mean, all we've got are 7 apples sitting on a tabletop. And so we're going to be analyzing the colors that are in the original painting. And then we're going to try to paint them in our painting, kind of based on the four colors of our tetrad, and doing basically what Cezanne did in terms of plastic color. His theory was that he could use colors to show form without necessarily having to use black and white in his composition, although I think there's a little black and white in this composition. But basically, he's got the warmest, brightest full spectrum color intensity tones, and his highest key colors are in the spot on each apple just left of center where you would find a highlight. So there's a highlight in each apple right around center or slightly left of center, and that's kind of like a photographic highlight, and that makes the center of each apple pop forward towards the viewer. Also, he kind of paints in here, and it's a little bit harder to see, a crescent-shaped shadow on each apple. Every apple has a crescent-shaped shadow that kind of helps to define the lit side of the apple and the shaded side of the apple. And so we're going to want to study that crescent-shaped shadow on each apple and indicate that on our paintings with some kind of a crescent shape, and sometimes Sometimes the crescent shape kind of even has a fork that kind of comes up into the middle of the apple. But usually, it's some kind of a crescent shaped shadow and combination of color that helps to define the shaded side of the apple. We've got this pool of light that is sitting in front of the apples. So this is warm, this is high key. You're going to use your high key value to do this for the most part, and that's going to make this portion of the tabletop advance towards the viewer. It's going to get closer and closer towards the viewer because it's a warm, bright color. And then this little bit more neutralized background area, that is a darker and a little bit more neutralized color. It is a lower key color or combination of colors, and that tends to recede away from the viewer. And so the foreground tends to advance towards the viewer. The center of each fruit tends to advance towards the viewer. The shaded side of each sphere tends to recede or wrap around the back side, receding away from the viewer. And the shaded portion of the table, the neutralized portion of the tabletop, is also receding away from the viewer. And that advancing towards the viewer and receding away from the viewer of the colors tends to open up the pictorial space and give you the illusion of 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional surface. So we're going to want to use, this printout, which I've made a bunch of, and I've also got them over here at Eden Hall on my table on the west side of the building. You can pick up one of these, and it also has lots and lots of paint on it. It also has lots and lots of directions on this thing. So pick up the instruction sheet, the assignment sheet, and pick up at least one of these. Most people pick up 2 of these because they always go say, I ruined it, I messed it up. But I'm here to tell you, you can't really mess these up. It is painting, and in painting, there's no such thing as an eraser. You just wait for the paint to dry, and if you don't like the color that you've got going, or the brush stroke, or whatever, you paint over the top of it, and you keep on going. And so painters never have to use an eraser. They just keep on advancing their painting and their paint colors. This is the one I did last year with the classes. And again, I've got a couple of coats of paint on here, but predominantly I had, I think, yellow, red, green, and blue, I think, were the colors that I was working with, or green and violet. Yellow, red, green, and violet, I think, were my 4 colors that I was working with. So we can kind of see that each apple is sort of indicated. It has an outside contour edge, and I'll talk about how to make that happen even more once we get established here. But the most important part is getting some kind of a really warm, bright color in that highlighted area in the center of each piece of fruit, and getting that shaded crescent shape of a shadow wrapping around the right side of each piece of fruit. Then getting the puddle, the pool of warm yellow bright light in the foreground, because that helps that pop towards the viewer, and trying to use all of your colors interspersed and smattering into each other in the background, but maybe 50-60% of your 2 darker colors back here to get this to be darker and neutralized, so that the background tends to recede away from the viewer. And that's how you open up your pictorial space. We're exploring plastic use of plastic colors in a composition with this thing. So this is my 4 for the price of 1 project, because we're looking at plastic color. We're exploring pointillism and optical color mixing on this thing by using this the application of pure colors, pure dots of color on your painting. And let's see, pointillism, plastic color, plastic space. So it's 3 or 4 different concepts all kind of wrapped up into one project. Now I took my painting from last year, and I don't know if you can see the border right here, but there's actually 2 pieces of mat board or tag board or cardstock glued together here. So I've got the piece of cardstock that the original painting came on out of the printer. It's 8.5 by 11, and I've glued it onto a piece of watercolor paper or Bristol board, so that I've got a much stiffer kind of a thing here. And so this tends to resist the curling that you're going to get. There's going to be a lot of curling that happens in our paintings as we're painting on them, because you can paint on the front surface with your liquid color. Then as it dries, it shrinks a little bit, and when it shrinks, it kind of pulls on the surface of the paper, and it gets this curling effect to happen. Nope, there's no problem with that. We're just going to want to kind of flatten them out again, especially for framing or for display later on. And so that's why I wound up actually gluing mine down to another piece to just make it a little bit flatter, so that it would lay flatter a little bit and present a little bit better. These are some pieces that students did last year, and you can see that we've got some kind of rudimentary identification of the different color areas in the composition, with a little bit of understanding this idea of the crescent shaped shadow on the right side of each piece of fruit. This person didn't quite get it on every piece of fruit, so these two feel a little flatter because this doesn't quite feel or doesn't quite do the crescent shaped thing. And this one, has a little bit of a highlight over here in this slightly left of center area, but this one doesn't. So this, if this one just had just a little bit more of a smattering of orange dots in here to kind of break up this area and give us a little bit more of a sense of the highlight in the center, that could make this one pop a lot more three-dimensionally. This one tends to lay flat on the surface. This one tends to pop a little bit because we've got bright color kind of wrapping around a crescent shape on this side, and a little darker color wrapping around in a crescent shape on this side. So even though we're looking at the stem end of the apple, this is the stem end of the apple that we're looking straight into, this one still does a pretty good job of being a three-dimensional apple. So that's kind of what we're going to be playing with as we work with these, is how to make these apples actually look like the painting. How do we get them to become three-dimensional and kind of pop so that they have a center that sort of advances towards the viewer, and a shadow, crescent-shaped shadow that wraps around the fruit and tends to recede away from the viewer. The orange, that pool of light tending to advance towards the viewer. The neutralized or darker area tending to recede away from the viewer. And it works that way. Even when you've got big dots. This person had really big dots, and so sometimes they got so into the dots that the dots became a texture, and we just need a little bit more organization here to try to find the crescent shaped shadow on the one side of the fruit and the highlight in the center piece of the fruit over here. But it doesn't take much to be able to just maintain that kind of discipline. And you can get this concept of, the brighter area in the left of center, on each piece of fruit, the crescent shape on the right portion of each piece of fruit, and to make them all kind of pop into a three-dimensional sphere that looks like an apple. So let's see, I was painting on this, and so I think I'm going to bring the painting in and just demonstrate a little bit more of my painting technique, especially for those who got here late. So my colors identified are a double split complement: yellow-orange, red-orange, blue-green, and blue-violet. And I've got a little bit of each color on here established. I still don't have the whole sheet filled up, and I certainly don't have it so densely packed and filled up that it really gets an overall sense of the paint taking over just yet. And so this is going to take me a while. What paint shall I use next? He asked himself, kind of strangely. I think I'm going to go back probably, excuse me, to the green, and kind of work with the green maybe I'll do the orange red. I started off with the orange red this morning. And so on camera, so you can see it, I'm going to mix up a little bit of orange red, which means some orange and some red. And I'm mixing them really close together. I'm trying to make like a puddle that I can just stick my the back end of my paintbrush into. I'm painting with the round backside of the paintbrush, the wrong end of the paintbrush to do this. And so I'm just going to try to figure out where I can put this stuff so you guys can see this while I'm working on it. About like that. And bring this in here so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to mix these together, but not perfectly or totally, and just try to do this. And so I can get, for my money, the size of dot that I'm looking for is going to be somewhere, around 6 or 8 dots off of each dip into the paint that I can get onto my painting. And so you're going to be laying down paint like this, and there's really no red in this area of the painting, but I'm going to put a few dots in there and then come back and try to get my yellow orange to kind of fill in there too. This one really has its yellow orange highlight right here, just left of center, just like this one. I guess I can come in here and try to make, this idea of crescent shape. If I can, I'm a sculptor, so I'm always thinking of what is the shape that I'm looking at and how to make this thing kind of pop three-dimensionally. And so, sometimes I'm going to go a little bit over like a green dot, put a dot of red, and sometimes it's going to overlap a green dot. And sometimes I'll come back with the green and I'll overlap some of the red dots. But that really made this apple right here tend to pop a little bit more three-dimensionally with these two different crescent shapes on both sides. Now, that's not exactly what Cezanne had going here, and so I'm going to have to, what am I going to have to do? I'm going to have to bring a little bit more red in here. And he's got a patch of kind of a neutralized red there. And he's got another patch up here. And he's got something that kind of goes around his stem end of his apple right here. But even so, this is still kind of looking like a sphere because I'm kind of going around round shapes with like a halo of dots and making my crescent shapes kind of happen, over on the one side, and then building my two crescents towards a middle that has a little bit more of a void in it. And so let's see what I can do here. And I'm cheating a little bit, and I'm showing you guys how to cheat too. So my red-orange puddle here has a little bit more orange on this side, a little bit more red on this side, and red-orange in the middle. And sometimes when I want to cheat, I'm going to grab a little bit of the more orangey stuff and head to the middle of my painting like this. And then it would be nice to have a little bit more of a dirtied up red that I could come in with over here. But I think one way of dirtying up the red over on this side of the apple is going to be to take some of my blue-green or blue violet and get a smattering of blue green and blue violet dots over here to kind of dirty this up, because when red and green are going to be together, interspersed with each other, they will become neutralized optically. There's going to be optical color mixing here, and blue and green tend to neutralize each other out, and so it'll look more neutral, like this area of this apple over here. You're gonna have to take my word for it, because there's gonna be hours of painting with this stuff to start to achieve some of these results, and it's going to take a while and it's going to be hard. So kind of settle in for putting down a whole bunch of dots. The first 2 or 3 hours it's just going to take to like fill this thing up for the first time, and then we're going to be fixing stuff. Once you get it roughed out, then we're going to actually come back and we're going to do a lot of fixing and trying to find again where we want our highlights and fix some of the shapes of the crescent things that are what do you call them? Shadows that are on the right side of the fruit. And occasionally you got to bring, you know, you've even got to take, other colors and kind of just intersperse them a little bit in here just to break stuff up. So occasionally I have to break things up. Even up here in this dark area, I have to put, the occasional red orange up here just to break it up a little bit. I got a little carried away with my greens over here, so now I have to kind of break up some of this green with a smattering of my red orange over here. And it's the same thing, even down here. You got to just, one thing that painters understand is that you have to introduce your colors all over the place and have them just in different amounts with each other, interspersing. And so we're going to play this game quite a bit with this particular thing. I haven't gotten my yellow orange established down here, but even so, I'm just going to put a smattering of red orange dots down here just to break up the space, because I can see in the painting itself that there are other kind of secondary shadows and stuff that kind of define the outside edges of this warm pool of light that is in the foreground. And so we're going to kind of define some of those edges of the puddle, edges of the pool. It's a pool. Everybody in, everybody out of the pool. Does anybody have any questions? Would anybody else like to talk while I'm doing the crazy here? Because I don't want to just, be doing the crazy without you guys. Has anybody been able to start their painting and have any comments, concerns, questions about this painting process so far? Otherwise, I'm going to be painting and ignoring you guys for the most part, which is a terrible thing. I shouldn't do that. I do like to suggest that people paint the entire painting all at once, bounce around to different apples and make sure that you're not just spending all of your time on one particular apple. When you spend all the time finishing one part of the painting and then moving on to the next one, the painting doesn't look well integrated. It's really nice to be able to intersperse and spatter your paint all over the place, because you get a general sense of color mixing that happens. And overall, these objects will tend to emerge, and they will tend to synthesize themselves as the colors become complete, and the densities of the colors and the color shapes really start to get established inside there. I think I'm going to change colors again. I've got one eye on the clock here, and I've only been at this for about 25 minutes or so. I'm going to go with a yellow orange, because I think I'm going to work on this little area of the pool of light that's in the front. So I'm going to make a yellow orange by putting a little yellow and a little orange together on my palette, and doing a little bit of mixy, but mostly I'm going to start doing this kind of stuff in earnest. And this is going to be a pretty high density pool of light, and so there's going to be a whole bunch of yellow orange down in here. And I am getting a little bit of wet in wet color mixing with my yellow and my orange, so each dot is just a little bit different. And I know that the dots are going to be, for the most part, yellow orange in the center of this pool of light. So I'm going to kind of make the pool of light my high key color, which is yellow orange. And then as I fade out to the edges of the pool of light, that's when I intersperse other colors like the blue green and the red orange, and even a little bit of the violet, just so that it kind of disperses to something that is a little bit darker around the edges, and that gives you the sense that the light is pooling and strongest in the middle, and then when you get out here in the edges, it kind of softens and diffuses and gets a little darker around the edges of this pool. And hopefully when you have 75 or 80% of your high key color, like yellow orange in the center of the pool, that's really going to make that part pop and advance towards the viewer, or at least give the illusion of that advancing towards the viewer. Again, trying to create that illusionistic three-dimensional pop that we're trying to achieve in all of this. Okay, that's feeling good. So I'm going to come back up in here into some of these apples that have orange and yellow in the edge of the apple. And I guess I'm going to try to get that happening just a little bit more in here. This one has a little bit of a orange yellow highlight in this area. This has a really strong sense of kind of a crescent of yellow orange happening in the middle of this space here. And I really haven't been able to get the stem end of the apple, that shadow, established yet in the middle of that apple. So, you know, that's where I kind of wish I had a little bit of violet so that I could blast a little bit of violet in there and see how that works. I'm going to need some of this in here. And so you're seeing that I'm putting down fairly uniform shapes, dots. They're about 1/8 of an inch or so in diameter. And so that's pretty good for that part. This one up here needs a little bit more help. We need a highlight here that's going to really make the center of this apple pop towards the viewer. So I'm stealing a little bit more from the yellow side of my yellow orange puddle just to make that pop a little bit more. I think I'm going to do that here too, to really get that portion, that highlight portion of the apple to really advance and pop towards the viewer. He puts a secondary highlight for some reason up here because he's a slapdash painter, I guess. I don't know. Maybe a little bit of the orange down here because I see them, and possibly intersperse some of my orange into the red dots here to just break them up a little bit. Nobody wants to see all one color, all all by itself. We want to always, you know, try to intersperse the dots as much as possible. Yes. So I'm just working away here and welcoming any questions or comments that you guys might have. Please feel free to unmute your mics with any kind of a question or comment, because there is no such thing as a bad one. I've got my volume turned up so that I can even hear you guys. Sometimes my computer, when it shuts down, it resets itself to a really low volume, and then I can never hear you guys when you're talking. Okay, but I'm just going to do a little bit more of this and then call it a day for today. I'm going to check this last apple that is hidden under here and look for its highlight. These two apples on the right side, on the upper right hand side, are green apples. There's no red in these two apples. So I've got 5 red apples and 2 green apples over here. And so that's always interesting, you know, how to deal with that kind of tension in the composition, because eventually these apples are going to be green over on this side of the composition. So I've got to bring some of these highlights that are around the shaded portion of the stem end of the apple right here. So I'm going to, you know, kind of hit some of these areas that are on the crown, the back side of the stem end of the apple, because that's picking up a lot of highlight reflection from the light source. And we've got this smattering of dots here that are the main highlight in the center of the fruit right here. And then even over here, he's got just a brush stroke that kind of went into that spot there. And he's got a little bit of highlight happening on this top edge of the apple right here. As you can see just this highlighted edge right here on the apple. So I thought I'd try to pick that up. There's also kind of a little highlight over here. And those kinds of things just tend to help us find the edges of the apple. Sometimes you have to do a string of pearls with your highest high key thing just to try to help find the outside edge of the apple. Can you see this kind of, oh, it's off the shot. Can you see this string of pearls that I'm starting to establish along this edge here that can kind of help us find something when it starts to get lost again? We can do a string of pearls, little dots of color along an edge like that. And that's what I did on this thing here. You can really see the string of pearls kind of trying to do an outside contour line to help pick out the outside contour of the apple when it starts to get lost in a pointillism, in a pointillist composition.
I was going to ask about that. Is that considered a highlight, or is that more of just an artistic style to sort of bring that edge out from the background with the higher color?
Well, let's look at his painting, his original painting here, and I might have to even pick it up and bring it up closer so you guys can see it. Um, a lot of it is about contrast. So as an artist, we're trying to figure out how to create contrast in the painting. And so we've got a super hot highlight right here on this edge, and then we've got our super dark shadow right next to it. And we've got the contrast of those two things. And that really helps us strongly see the edge of the apple here. But right here, this apple tends to almost lose itself in the shadow. And we can barely pick out the edge of this apple here from the inkier shadow that's right next to it. The only thing that's maybe illuminating this shaded side of the apple is a little reflected light coming off of this apple here. The light bounces in, hits this surface, and then reflects over here, and might be a little bit of reflected light. So we can try to do that kind of stuff. I think there's a little bit of reflected light over on this side of this apple, which kind of helps pick it out from the cast shadows, which are just behind and to the bottom side of the apple. And we can do that here. So sometimes to approximate this reflected light, I will do the little string of pearls effect in pointillism, because it's a wonderful cheater effect. You know, when I lose, when I've only got 4 colors and I've only got dots and I can't do brush strokes, I'm somewhat limited in the way that I can lay down color here. So when I've got, you know, a shadow here and a shaded portion of the apple here, sometimes this gets muddy and it's hard to see the two. And so sometimes, I don't know if you can see it, you can't see it. There's just that little bit of like string of pearls effect, like right in here along that bottom edge. It won't focus on that. I'm sorry. You'll just have to look at your own sheet. And so sometimes, you know, just dot, 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 and your high key value will kind of help pick out that bottom edge so that it doesn't get lost in the shaded portion of the painting. I know that there is nothing more intimidating than to look at this blank piece of paper and go, oh my God, my teacher wants me to make a painting, especially if you've never painted before. I know that that's kind of an intimidating, daunting task. But I've only got about an hour or two's worth of work in this so far. So in an hour, I was able to establish some basic paint areas and shape areas in this thing. And as I continue to fill it in, I'm probably going to lose some of my shapes. And after I lose the shapes, then I'm going to have to try to pick out the edges of shapes again. And sometimes I will do that with this string of pearls effect. And you can, it's not just with the yellow in this painting. I'm also doing it with the green and with the violet too. You can see that sometimes I'm using green or violet or even red to do a real similar thing, to try to find my rounds, my edges, and play with them a little bit. And this is artistic license. It's not in the original painting, but you know, you just have to try to get some things to work to make your painting work. And so we'll be playing with that, and I will try to help you guys. If you have a question, you know, show me your painting, and I can say, okay, try this along this edge, or try this in the middle to make the middle pop. We're trying to not lose the shapes in this thing as we completely cover this thing with dots. And sometimes the dots, when they're interspersing with each other, they do tend to muddy up edges and contours. And so sometimes we have to try to find ways to pick out those contours again, to reinforce the contours a little bit. And the string of pearls cheater technique is one way that I do that. So good question. Thank you very much for that. And it's so nice to know that there's somebody out there who has a pulse and and is interested and had a question to ask, because that was wonderful. I get lonely sometimes here talking to myself, and I know that you guys are listening, and I know you're trying to drink it all in. And I know that sometimes it's like drinking from a fire hose. So I can appreciate where you're coming from. But until you get 3 or 4 hours worth of painting in and get something established on your painting, I won't really be able to help you. We won't really be able to dialogue too much about this. We have about 5 days left on this project, and I would like to be able to dialogue with you about this. So I'm going to leave it here for now and ask you guys to get going on this. The worksheet, the assignment sheet, and the blank sheets are out here on the west side of my building on the table in case you want to come and get one. But otherwise, you're going to have to get your paints out and spend some time on task with this. And then we'll revisit this again on Friday and see where we are. So without any further ado, I think I'm going to call it a day. I'm sure willing to entertain any questions or comments. We've got 5 participants. That's really nice. Okay, so thanks for coming today. I do appreciate that. I'm checking the chat to see if there's any questions in the chat. Nope, no comments or questions in the chat. So I'm going to wrap this up then for today. Thank you very much, and we will see you again on Friday afternoon. Good luck with the rest of your week. Bye-bye.